Hello everybody, it's Kelli Folsom here, and I want to welcome you back. We are going into our next module, number 4. What we're going to be doing in this module is discussing how to get that look of light, glow, and atmosphere in your painting. So we're going to be building upon the pear painting that we started, where we broke down the step of how do we get the value contrast, the value structure, and then start to create the illusion of form by using light shapes and shadow shapes in the painting. So in this lesson, we're going to be building on this and making this painting come alive with the power of light through getting reflected light and getting a sense of air and atmospheric glow in the painting. So let's dive in and get started. Okay, so everybody remembers our beautiful little yellow pear that we started, yes? So as we discussed in the last, what we've done so far in the last lesson was start to create the illusion of form by getting the drawing convex and correct, by getting the shadow shapes, the light shape and the shadow shape, and getting this to look really lit up by using nice thick juicy paint, and then creating a focal point on the interior of the form with the highlight. And in fact, I just want to kind of clean up some of this edge here with some cleaner paint again. Okay. Now, that's great, you know, it's great to get this far and gain this level of understanding. But I find that if people do stop here, one of the things that they are really missing out on is really the power of light. So when you have light that is just like this, it's just everything's separate, right? So the pear, you know, has a color and it has a value, and we've got the pear painted pretty much as light as it can go, right? As light and bright as it can go. And then we have the background and it's separate, and the shadow, you know, is kind of related, obviously related to the pear because it has some of the color of the pear in it, but everything feels kind of separated, you know. And one thing about light is that light moves. Light hits something and it bounces off of it and refracts into the environment or into the tabletop, or light hitting a wall will bounce back into, say, the shadow of something and cause a little reflected light into it. So if you do not get the look of light spilling out and you capture that effect in your paintings, then everything's going to feel maybe kind of separate from one another, not really very connected, and you're going to lose out on some sense of unity in your painting. So the first thing I like to do is I look at the most lit up edge. What is the lightest and brightest thing I have in this painting? What is getting the most amount of light? And if it doesn't quite feel lit up enough, you know, or I just want to get a stronger look of light in the whole painting, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to let some of that light spill out. And the light tends to spill out the most along the lit edge. So now I should say this won't, your background has to be darker than the object that is causing the light spillage, shall we say. So this yellow pear would not spill out against a white background because white is actually brighter and lighter than a yellow pear. So if you kind of think about like a white t-shirt versus a black t-shirt outside, a white t-shirt tends to bounce all of this light off of it to the point that you almost kind of get blinded by it. So black absorbs and white reflects. So that is the one caveat about getting this glow, is that this object that's causing the glow has to be lighter and brighter than the thing back behind it. So I always start it really, really strong along that whole lit edge, and even pulling down to the bottom. And I just kind of walk that in with the paint that I already put down, to get that look of light. Now, so it looks wrong at first, and then you integrate it. So I'm going to use some raw umber with that color again and just kind of integrate that so that it now becomes more of an invisible effect. But the thing that I see that people do the most is they try to start their glow and their light way out here and then creep up on that edge. They're afraid to mess up this edge here. And it just tends to work a lot better because to start it at that starting edge, because this is the edge that's getting the most amount of light. So it's much, much easier to kind of blend this side together, and it's much easier to then come back and kind of make it look like you didn't do that. All right. So that is, kind of what I like to call light spillage. I think the technical term is refracting light. So, and this is the one thing that will both make your object look much more lit up, because if something is really light and lit up, it's going to spill out into the atmosphere. And it's also going to give your whole painting a sense of glow. Yeah, a sense of glow and a sense of atmosphere. So the other key ingredient to getting more of a sense of glow and the power of just a believable sense of light really in your painting is through reflected light. So in this case, this part of the form, let's say like right here, is, kind of round and opening up, and so the light on the tabletop plane and the light on the wall is sort of reflecting into this shadow. So first we start the whole shadow color, and then we put in, if it's like a cool reflected light, which in this case it is, then we put in some of that cool reflected light. So with reflected light, it's very subtle. You want to really watch your value change, make sure that you don't change the value too dramatically. And the color and brilliance of the reflected light is related to what's causing it. So this reflected light would look very different if it was like a lemon or an orange reflecting into the pear. Instead, it's just light. It's light hitting this black shadow box and this lighter table here. And so it's more of a subtle color. It's just kind of a light, cool color here to get the reflected light. And so I also want to keep brush strokes out of this and impasto out of this as well. So thick paint looks more lit up, and we want to look at thick paint, and we want to ignore thinner paint and less brushstrokey paint, less impasto, but less thick paint. So shadow recedes and light comes forward. How the human eye perceives the world is we focus on light and we tend to ignore shadow. So I'm just going to again just sort of intensify this cast shadow underneath. You always want to take your darks pretty much as dark and rich as you can go, so that you have more contrast. So in this case, we're doing that light against dark value idea. Now, the other place where you might see some light spillage, as I mentioned, was on the tabletop. And again, this is very subtle, but I'm just going to get some of that yellow mixed in, wet into wet, into my tabletop plane. So when you look for how light is affecting some of the other areas, some of the other local colors, you're going to bring a lot of cohesion to your painting. Now, light is physically hitting this tabletop plane. The light is angled down, so any of those flat planes are catching the light source more. So here is another area where we're going to get a little bit of reflected light up into the underplane of this, let's make that a little bit darker, of this pear. You don't want the value of your reflected light to, or the color, the value to be the same as what's in the light. So you do have to make sure that you don't go too light in the reflected light. And sometimes it's really, especially on the subtle stuff, you've got to kind of go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until you get it just like how you want it. Now, I would say if you want to bring even more illusion of form into this pear, I would say it would be by way of using some more pure broken color. So this is kind of going back to the last lesson and maybe kind of just pushing it a little step forward. But one thing with creating form is that you want to bring some area of focus front and center on the form. So in this case, with the simple pear, there's not a lot going on with it, right? There's not like it's not like painting a patterned vase or something like that. So I'm just using some cad yellow deep with my white and my cad lemon, getting kind of a little bit of a deeper yellow, richer yellow than what I have on the pear for some of these markings that aren't on the pear. And so that's going to bring a little more color to the pear. It's also going to bring some more specific brush strokes to the pear, especially and again, remember, you primarily want this front and center because you're just trying to get a little more illusion of three-dimensional form. I can also go a little bit further with that sort of darker greenish grayish color as it's about to turn into shadow. So I can actually start to reach for a little bit of ultramarine. Let's do a little bit of raw umber. And in with this yellow, kind of go a little more green here, and especially since this is our only subject is the pear. Sometimes it's actually harder when you're just painting one single object and trying to make an interesting painting out of it. Although that's not really our purposes here. We're just trying to understand form, but I might as well show you, how you could take this a little bit further. So on this side, you've got, kind of some greenish gray tones going a little bit darker and darker as we begin to turn into the shadow. So basically just looking for a little more variety, a little more visual interest on this pear, and pretty much whatever has the most impasto and the most light on it is what we're going to look at. Actually, I'm seeing where I kind of illustrated that dip in on the last video, that's still kind of there. So I want to caution you about oil paint. It is thick and gooey, and maybe that feels scary to you, but you're never going to learn to paint with oil paint unless you just go with it, unless you just embrace the thick and gooey nature of it. So you have to get comfortable making brush strokes, loading a lot of paint on your brush, putting paint down, just kind of pushing it around, really, because you can actually get a lot of wet on wet layers with oil paint, even before it's dry. But if you don't remember the very first video I shared with you, if you don't have paint on the end of your brush, all you're going to be doing is dragging paint off. So you do want to make sure that you continue to add paint to your brush. And, you know, have fun with it. You know, who says that we can't have, you know, maybe a stronger reflection down here to bring in some more action and impact to the painting. Play with your brush strokes too, you know, have fun while you're at it. I know this series I'm really trying to focus hard to give you all of the fundamentals that you need to succeed, and sometimes that can get a little bit boring, you know. So make sure that you try to learn the fundamentals, but also have fun at the same time. Experiment, you know, go crazy sometimes and try things and let go and, you know, be more bold. I'm also seeing a little touch of like a hotter color here. I'm going to use that Chinese orange, which I told you was a guilty pleasure color of mine, on the turn into shadow. Get a little extra heat on the turn into shadow. And of course, if you wanted to change the background color to something else, you can. Here's just kind of how I smush with a palette knife. Sometimes if the paint is too wet, it will actually take off some of the paint, but that can also create some really interesting textures in your painting. Then of course you just want to step back and see how things are reading. You know, be careful not to just always paint up close. Make sure that you stand back and see how things are holding up, or, you know, can you get more glow, more light? Is something starting to look a little boring? So, you know, also just to illustrate, using that palette knife to put a highlight on. Okay, so yeah, and we can go a little bit more with this just to kind of show you, you know, once you've got, let's say maybe form, you know, how do you take it further? It could be, you know, again, by maybe adding in some more broken color. That went a little too green. Or some color variation. And here, again, just watch the value, like that's kind of dropping a little too much in value. Back to my lighter yellow and Naples yellow. But the main thing is for me to give you the basics, and then you can sort of explore from there, kind of like what I'm doing here, you know, having a little more fun with it, experimenting, playing around with it. You can also use this knife to kind of tie stuff together. Remember in that first video when I talked to you both about using the palette knife to both build texture or to perhaps tie things together if it, you know, if you do get something in there that gets a little too dark. If it gets too dark in value, it's going to start looking muddy. If it gets too light in value and cool, it's going to start looking chalky. So a lot of times people ask about how do I avoid getting mud, or how do I avoid getting chalk? And that's really the problem, is that the value, the value range that you have set, the value shape that you've set, you're now starting to kind of destroy it by either putting in too dark of a value or too light of a value. So when I stood back, I think it would be nice to get a little more intensity to this lit side over here. So I'm going to go a little more lighter here on this side. With some more yellow. As long as I don't go to the same look of yellow and same impasto, because again, we have to have contrast for that pear to come forward from the background. As long as I still have contrast there, I'm fine. I can, build more light or build more glow. Maybe we can even pop a little more light back here, back behind the pear. Now the other thing you can use to smooth is just a soft hair brush. So I showed you this brush in the beginning. It's a silver ruby satin number 8 blendy brush. You just want to be careful with blendy brush, because the temptation is going to be for you to come in here and blend everything out. And that's just going to ruin your painting, because you want thin versus thick. So thicker paint, more interesting brush strokes come forward to the eye. So if we want this background to recede more, we want less interesting things happening back here. We want less value changes, less brush strokes, less paint quality, to get it to go back. Okay. I would say last but not least is making sure that your cast shadows are, you can also get some glow in these cast shadows too, come to think of it. So you can get like some glow from the pear in there as well, so with some cad yellow deep. You just want to make sure that your cast shadows are dark, but they're also related to whatever the value is that they're sitting on. So cast shadows are more related to the value of the object that they're sitting on. So for example, if I did take this darker, I'm going to use some blue and some Chinese orange. If I did take this tabletop darker and richer, then that cast shadow could stay that dark. Just to show you. If I wanted to move it away from the raw umber. And look at that. I mean, we had all of that raw umber and white down there. And this is just oil paint. So this is kind of a good illustration to show you that, oil paint is so forgiving. You can change the color, you can paint mix directly on the canvas and not on the palette. Yeah. And so things can be adjusted, things can be changed, even wet into wet. You don't have to scrape it off, or wait for it to dry. Just make your change. Obviously once you get so much paint down, perhaps, you have to maybe pull some off, but the panels and the canvases will take quite a bit of paint. Just trying to even up that back horizon line at least a little bit. It was all kinds of wonky. I think I kind of lost some of that contour, so I'm just going to move the highlight in just a little bit. So this is also a good illustration to show you just how flexible and malleable paint is. So you can just take a knife, kind of smush all that around, flatten it back out. If you want to come back in and rework it, it's easy to kind of scooch a highlight over, or of course you could flatten it all back out and then put a new highlight on. So I prefer flattening out if you need to kind of redo an area versus scraping with the knife. I know a lot of people, and sometimes you're just in a fit of frustration, which is understandable, and so you just want to scrape it. You're just so mad, You're like, oh, I can't get it, just totally understandable. Even professional artists still have those days where they just can't get it. Okay. But I think it's really good to know what all you can do with oil paint and how forgiving it can be. I remember one of my first classes I was trying so carefully to paint in the lines, and I made a mistake. I had drawn in actually with paint, but I didn't understand that the oil paint didn't dry fast. It was my first time using oils, and so I made a mistake on the painting, and the whole time I've been really tense, painting this. It was just like a white ball. And the teacher came around and I asked her, how do I fix this mistake over here I got outside the lines? And I don't know what to do to fix it. And she said, oh, well, it's just oil paint. You just paint over that, or scrape it off and do it again. But her advice to me was paint over it. And so oh my gosh, okay, I will. It was like, eureka, okay, I love this oil paint stuff. It's so forgiving. And it really is. There's just so much that you can do with it, and do with it even, like I said, wet into wet. So don't be so scared of it. Don't be so scared of making a mistake. I mean, with, for example, watercolor and acrylic and mediums like that, there is, now I'm just kind of moving my brush around while I'm talking to you guys, but it does dry, and so you have to be a little bit more careful than you do perhaps with oils. Careful as far as what you put down and how that's going to affect whatever you want to put on top. So it's just paint. So, don't be too afraid of it. Have a good time. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next module. Bye.